Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Tap Into Greater Olean Zoom podcast recorded on Tuesday, August 11th, 2020. Mike Hogan with you here, joined by a very special guest, St. Bonaventure University President, Dr. Dennis DePerro. President DePerro, thank you so much for your time. How are you doing tonight?
Mike, my pleasure. Nice to be with you. Doing well. It's a beautiful evening here in Olean on the St. Bonaventure campus, and we're anxious, of course, to have you and our students back here in a couple of weeks.
It's been a crazy last several months for everyone around the country, Dr. DePerro. Colleges and universities especially have been forced to make a number of tough decisions amid this ongoing coronavirus pandemic. When you were sworn in a few falls ago, I'm sure you never envisioned having to lead this university through something so challenging and something so difficult. I just want you to tell me a little bit about your decision-making process over the last couple months. I know that you had a lot of people, a lot of teamwork, brain power going into this reopening plan, but in the end, the buck stopped with you. How did you personally make decisions over the last several months?
Sure. Well, Mike, I think in any situation, a good leader is going to take the advice and the counsel of those around him or her. And in the case here at St. Bonaventure, each step of the way as we went through this process, I've been very fortunate to be surrounded, first of all, by a very strong leadership team that I've consulted with, our President's Council, our senior executive management team. And then in addition to that, regular consultation on each of these things, each situation, basically, as we've gone through this, and every day changes and the situation changes every day. Consultation with our faculty senate, members of our faculty, and of course, our board of trustees, particularly the board officers, the executive committee of the board of trustees, and our full board. And, I've gotten various advice as we've gone through this. And in the end, quite honestly, paramount to all of this is the safety of our students, the safety of our faculty, and the university. And so as I've made final decisions in consultation with all of those groups, they have all been in the spirit of what's best for our students, for our faculty, and for the university. And safety, of course, is at the top of all this.
Now, I mentioned a little bit, everything was probably so challenging for you guys, but was there one or two decisions that really stood out among the rest that were the most difficult to make?
That's a great question. I would say to you that in the early stages of decision-making related to how we proceed for this coming fall, I think there was a good deal of discussion around whether we deliver our academic programs online or in person, and what's going to work best, and what's going to work best for our students. And there's a lot that we took into consideration before making the decisions that we did. I've spent countless hours, I can't tell you, from March until now, with various constituency groups, the Commission of Independent Colleges and Universities in New York State, with my fellow presidents in Western New York, the Franciscan presidents, the presidents of independent college presidents, presidents across New York State, both public and private. And we've all compared notes. We've talked about scenarios of how we're going to proceed. I've worked with CICU. I've talked with really all of our legislators. In fact, just last week, I had an appointment and a discussion with Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, and I've had conversations with Tom Reed, with our legislators locally here, Senator Barillo, Assemblyman Giglio. So again, there's been a lot of advice, a lot of conversation about what's going to work best for St. Bonaventure and what's going to work best for our students. And one of the compelling pieces, Mike, was when the whole pandemic started back in March, and we then had to make decisions about going online. We certainly realized in that process that our faculty, the product that we provide for students is best face-to-face. And we found, in those months in the spring, when we went online, even before our students left, one of the things that was compelling to me is the number of parents that wrote to me and asked me to try to keep our students on campus as long as we could. That because of where we're located and the low occurrence of COVID-19, even at that point in this region, and even now, 4 months later, parents felt that this was a particularly safe place for their children to be. So there are a lot of things that go into that decision, and that probably was the most difficult decision in terms of how to proceed. But I think that we still feel, and we continue to feel very confident in the direction that we're taking. And I think that, the team is such, our leadership team, all of us across the board, again, have designed a reopening plan that truly will keep our students, our faculty, and everyone here safe, as well as the community that surrounds us.
You kind of answered my next question for me, so thanks. But was there any other options that you guys were maybe weighing during the summer, maybe starting online for a few weeks and then coming back to campus, or maybe online at all? Were those two things ever considered?
We did actually weigh a couple of different options. Early on, it's interesting, early on in this, we go back to the April and May timeframe, a lot of institutions were trying to jump out ahead of this, and some places announced late starts because they wanted to make sure that we were through this. So we had some places like Ithaca College that announced an October 5th start. We had a number of places like that. And then all of a sudden things began to shift. And then places began to realize that again, looking at what was being recommended by health professionals, that it might be in our best interest to finish before Thanksgiving. So then we moved into the direction of finishing before Thanksgiving. We never, it's interesting. I think a lot of institutions like St. Bonaventure in New York State, and a lot of institutions our size nationally, because of our size, and especially here, our sprawl, we're able to socially distance our students when they come to campus. So I don't think many of us, or places that are like us, have really thought long and hard after getting beyond the decision of going in person to doing the online option. Because we know the best education that we can provide for our students is here on campus. So there have been variations in terms of our discussion, but that's how we landed at where we are now.
And I guess one follow-up here, how much, we've watched Major League Baseball and academics, totally not related, but we've watched, outbreaks happen in professional sports. I'm just wondering if that's maybe a concern for universities. You're seeing these professional sports leagues with, all these money and resources going into it, having trouble containing the virus and keeping everyone virus-free. Is that something that maybe concerns you guys a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think it is. It's a concern of all of ours. It's a concern for the safety of the students and the safety of the faculty and staff. One of the pieces here is that we do have a piece of equipment which has come to us through a partnership that we have in athletics that will do a rapid test for students, so that if students are symptomatic, we can do a rapid test and find out immediately if students have COVID-19. And if they do, we can then take all the proper precautions. So I think that we're very well prepared in that respect of any type of an outbreak and what we would do in those situations. But I have to say that concerns all of us. I think that given where we are, given the low occurrence in this region, and the fact that we are testing students, we're requiring, in New York State, the guidance that came from the governor related to higher education does not require testing. We are requiring students to take a test within 14 days of their arrival. Now, we recognize that it can change, they can take that test and then they could become COVID positive. But at least it's a baseline of knowing that the majority of our students who come here, the great majority, will have been tested, and we will know that they're negative before they come. So that if they become symptomatic here, we then can use the rapid testing system and in coordination with the county, make sure that we're on top of it right away.
Now you mentioned that testing machine. So to be clear, that's for athletics, or is that for the entire student body?
No, it's for the entire student body. But it will be used for students who are symptomatic. It will also, on the athletic side, be used more often there because of the competition and the close proximity of students. But remember that the Atlantic 10, we have at this point made the decision to postpone fall sports to the spring. And we do have a slight window where we will relook at this in mid-September. Now, in the A10, as I'm sure you're aware, the presidents of each of the institutions, we are the board of directors for the A10, and the presidents make that decision.
Now, did the testing machine, the rapid testing machine, did that come at any additional cost to the university?
No, it was really there's some cost to it, and we do have to purchase the tests themselves, but it is through a partnership with Vivitar, which is one of our athletic vendors. I will say this, and I think this is important. When we received the machine, we did make the investment of, I believe, 1,200 additional tests so that we're well prepared here for any type of situation where we might have several students that become symptomatic.
Now, I
think we're very well prepared.
Do you have an estimation of how much the tests cost, the 1,200 tests or so that you guys purchased?
You know, I don't, off the top of my head, I wouldn't even want to venture a guess. I know that we have incurred a number of expenses here on the campus related to PPEs and related to preparation of the campus in terms of our students returning, distant learning classrooms, technology, having Zoom capability in case a student is quarantined so that they would be able at least to access their classes and so forth. There have been tremendous amount of expenses. I have not looked specifically at that expense. I'm sure if it was hugely astronomical, I would know the amount.
Now, just shifting away from that for a couple, I have more questions on athletics later, obviously, but people talk about when things get back to normal and when this is over, but things may never be the same again, especially for education. How will higher education be permanently altered by the coronavirus pandemic?
Mike, that's a very good question, and it's one really I have to tell you. My discipline has been really the study of higher education, the study of education, and I'm a huge buff in higher education. Through my research when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, I'm a huge buff on the history of higher ed and the things that have impacted higher education throughout history. Things like the GI Bill and other times in history that have really changed the face of higher education. And I do believe that this pandemic and what we've been through will be a point here that changes higher education in a number of ways. It is going to be very difficult for some institutions to continue to persist after this, given some of the losses of students, given the loss of residential students, camp students on campus and so forth. There are institutions, one of my mentors at UPenn, Bob Zemsky, Dr. Robert Zemsky, wrote a book that was published this past January called The College Stress Test. And in that book, he talks about a large number of small colleges in this country that will not be in existence in 10 years from now. And in a conference call that I was on where he spoke further, he talked about double the number he had originally predicted due to the pandemic. So I do think it will change the face of higher education in America. I think there are some schools that will not be able to survive. And I think it will enhance the use of online learning and the real use of online learning for students, particularly at the graduate level. I think that we're going to see a lot of interest in online learning. But online learning is to be done appropriately. And we do a great job of this with our graduate programs at St. Bonaventure. It is not just putting a Zoom camera in a classroom and having the faculty member teach. It is a combination of all different types of media and done in a very, very systematic way. I think that a lot of colleges and universities through this have not had the time to go through the technology design that's needed to do online courses the way they need to be done.
Now you mentioned, a number of institutions may not be able to survive after this. What's the outlook for St. Bonaventure? Obviously you guys went through some level of financial hardship and probably are still going through that. How big were the revenue losses, and what's the future outlook for St. Bonaventure now that, we're going to start going to having kids back on campus again and kind of starting a normal routine again?
Sure. Well, as you know, you've been here and you know that over the last two years, we've brought in freshman classes above 500. And as we go through this right now, we have a freshman class for this fall that is above 500. So 3 years in a row that we've had record-breaking classes that we haven't had here in well over a decade. So with those good, solid enrollments and the new school of health professions and the beginning of our PA program there this year, our occupational therapy program next spring, our nursing program, and so forth, these last 3 years have given us some financial stability. And so we are in a very nice position right now as we went into this. So certainly we have done some things, as you know, we have done some things to try to offset this. We did have some furloughs during the summer months of some employees. There were some savings there. There are areas where obviously if we're not able to compete in athletics, that we don't have the travel expenses attached to that, and so forth and so on. So there are areas that have offset some of the expenses, but clearly the expenditures have outweighed those offsets, but not to in a situation like ours, at this point, not to the point that we've seen any dramatic problem that's going to cause a budget issue at this time. So I think that, again, a lot depends. There's a number of things that our finances depend on. They obviously depend on the revenues from tuition, from room and board, from our athletic revenues and so forth. And those things are yet to be seen. As you know, this situation evolves and changes every day. So if we don't have appropriate revenues, then we may have to make additional cuts and do some things. We have made some cuts in this year's budget, the fiscal year 21, just to prepare ourselves for all of these extra expenses. So I feel very good and very confident about where we are right now. Our financial management has never been better. Our board is very comfortable and very confident in where we are. And I think our faculty understands the position that we're in. We work with them regularly on areas of compensation and finance. And I think that in general, I think we're in a very good position right now to weather this storm. And we've weathered it well to this point, and we'll continue to weather it as best as we can. And that certainly, in comparison to a lot of other places, I think we look very, very good.
Now, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. A lot of mixed reviews out there about certain politicians and how they handled the coronavirus pandemic, as always. What letter grade would you give Governor Andrew Cuomo, how he's dealt with it?
Well, the letter grade thing, Mike, if you wouldn't mind, I don't know. First of all, I usually assign a letter grade when the course is over, and the course is not over. So I wouldn't assign a grade, but I would say this to you. With regard to the governor, I think the governor's done a very good job. I think he's done a very good job in terms of the executive orders and the way in which he proceeded from the very beginning of this process in New York State. It's been very organized. He made many of the right moves. In fact, when I spoke with Lieutenant Governor last week, I complimented her and the governor for the way that they've handled this. I think there've been a lot of positive things. The approach of reopening, the approach that has been taken with industry, with various other entities, a lot of very smart moves in terms of listening to the healthcare professionals and those who give advice, medical advice, on how to proceed. So I give the governor a lot of kudos related to that. I would say on the other side, just a couple of disappointments on my end, and that's one of the reasons I've had a conversation with Lieutenant Governor one-on-one. One of my issues has been, first of all, this whole quarantine piece. That, I felt very strongly, and the advisors we have here felt very strongly that if we were going to have students come from states that are hot states per se, or where there's an upward surge, that if we tested them before they came, when they arrived here, if they had 2 negative tests, we felt that was strong enough to not put students in a quarantine. It's very difficult. I think one of the hardest things for me is to envision for a moment, especially first-year students coming here and having to be in a quarantine for 14 days. I mean, you got to remember, I'm a guy who's a father, like the parents of these students. I just had 2 sons who graduated from college. And I can't imagine in my heart of hearts dropping one of those young men off to college. Both of them went as undergraduates to Providence College. And I couldn't imagine dropping them 5 or 6 hours from home and saying for 14 days, you're going to be locked up by yourself. As a parent, I'd have a tough time. So I really, petitioned Lieutenant Governor and so forth to try to change that, but we really didn't have luck. And the other piece I will tell you, I'm not sure a lot of people realize this, but my wife and I live in a building in downtown Olean. We live right on North Union Street. And, during the remote period times, I've watched the economy of Olean, a small town with a lot of small businesses, really suffer. I've watched, it was like a ghost town in March and April, in May, until workforces were allowed to return to work. And even then, it was still a little bit, there's still issues. And so with that, I did have some trouble and I really did have some trouble with the regional approach to reopening various areas. And I didn't like the fact, and I'm still not, the one piece I do differ with the governor, I do not like the fact that a small city like Olean that is relatively rural in a county that has had very low incidence is having to live by the same rules as Buffalo and Erie County that has had many more cases. And so what concerns me ahead of us is just as the regions reopen, the regions will close. And if there's a surge in Buffalo, that will close us down here. When we're further from Buffalo than some of the counties that were in the Finger Lakes region with Rochester that reopened before we did. So that approach, I would prefer a county approach the way it's being done in Pennsylvania. But those are my only negative pieces on the state side.
On the other hand, you don't have to elaborate on this as extensive as you just did on the governor, but what did you make of, or what have you made of the way the federal government and the Trump administration has responded to the coronavirus?
Well, that's a fair question. And although, most college presidents try to stay out of the politics of things, I would just make a couple observations. One is, I did say to you earlier in the conversation when you asked me about leading the university and, how I made decisions and so forth as a leader, I talked about, utilizing various constituencies for advice and so forth. And, I will say that on the federal side, I don't feel that the advice from the medical professionals has been taken as seriously as it could be. And I do think that that is an issue. I think that, you have to, at a time of crisis like this, a leader has to engage people and bring people together. And so I think that's an important piece. I mean, that we haven't seen as we should, but at the same time, I would compliment the federal government in terms of the Stimulus Act, in terms of what they've given us for students. I think that the funds that came, the emergency funds that came for our students, the emergency funds that came to the university, the stimulus dollars for unemployment, for us to be able to furlough. I was committed to preserving our workforce financially, and those stimulus funds allowed us to furlough some employees during the summer months. And while they were furloughed, some of them were actually making, most of them actually, in fact, I think all but one who volunteered to be furloughed made more than they would have made working here at the university. So I think on that side, I think the federal government has been very good. But there's a lot yet that remains to be seen.
Now we're going to move to a few student-specific questions. So transitioning away from all the political talk.
Sure.
High-risk faculty members, or those who fell into a certain category, had the option to fill out a form to teach in-person or online classes, or to opt out of in-person classes in a sense. That's been a popular word lately. Why weren't high-risk students or students at all given the option to take online classes if they didn't feel comfortable coming to campus?
They actually, it's a very good question, because students actually have the same option as faculty. And that is, students do have the right, and they are allowed to work with our Office of Disability Services and submit legitimate medical documentation to allow them to make arrangements, and we would make accommodation for them. So that is available to them. In the same situation, our faculty have the same situation. They were required to give the university medical documentation as well for us to make those accommodations. So we have been consistent on that front with both students and faculty. And quite honestly, Mike, I have had several conversations about this with parents. And I think in a couple of cases, the parents did seek the medical advice and the documentation for their children, and they are trying to arrange a schedule where they can pretty much take the classes online. But again, we are certainly, if an individual provides that documentation and works with disability services, we're certainly willing to provide accommodation.
Okay, so my understanding that the students, were they contacted by the university individually, just as the faculty members were?
It's in the reopening plan.
Okay, all right, got
so
it.
It is spelled out. Yeah, in the reopening plan, in fact, it does state clearly that we recognize the university. The statement is something to the effect that St. Bonaventure University recognizes the importance of providing accommodation, to individuals who cannot, for various reasons, be in the classroom or on the campus.
My bad. I just must have missed that then in that long document of things. Next question here. This year will be obviously unorthodox for everybody. This may not apply to an upperclassman as much, but if any students decided to take a gap year due to the pandemic, obviously maybe they feel uncomfortable coming to campus, or maybe the tuition, they can't pay that due to the economic impacts. Has enrollment taken any kind of an impact for fall 2020 at least?
Well, there's two sides of this, and if you'll allow me to throw a little humor into this, Mike, we've had students on both sides of this. So we've had probably, I would say, around 15 to 20 students who have asked either to take a leave of absence, or freshman students who have deferred their admission to the spring semester or a year from now. But the number has been relatively very low. And the last count I had was right around 15 students, quite honestly. But when I say the humorous side of this is, we have also had just as many students when we went out with the options for quarantine. We've had just as many students who were trying to get back to campus early to quarantine or to be on campus or in the area as soon as they could. So it's a little interesting, and I hope that they'll heed my messages as they arrive and during our parent student town halls, that I hope their intention isn't to come back to campus to party or walk around without PPEs and protection, because that obviously is not negotiable and it's not going to be tolerated.
So yeah, I guess moving towards a testing question here. So obviously everyone's supposed to be tested within 14 days of coming back. The quarantine students had a little bit of a different situation, obviously. But I talked to Dr. Watkins maybe a month ago or so, and he said that the testing idea is great, and he liked the idea, but his concern was a test only indicates if an individual is infected or not at that time, as we all know. So students can test negative, say they tested today, they get the results back in a few days, they could go out and contract the virus after that. Is that maybe a concern of the university has about the testing right now?
Well, we talked long and hard about this, quite honestly, and I think I mentioned earlier on, a lot of institutions did not choose to go in this direction with testing. I had a lot of conversation with other college presidents about it. I felt that it was important for us to at least establish a baseline, that we would at least know if if all of our students that arrived on campus on August 24th tested within 14 days and were negative, right? And that's what they have to produce for us before they can arrive. That a smaller fraction might be less likely to come to this campus asymptomatic. And if they came symptomatic, we had the rapid testing machine to take care of that. So the feeling here, quite honestly, was a couple of things. We have a great faculty here. And this faculty, they deliver their academic courses and their academic programs best in person. That's why students who choose to come here, that's why when students leave here, the most valuable interactions that they've had have been with their faculty. And we wanted to preserve that. And I think that this was a way to help not only students, but more importantly, to help faculty feel comfortable with the students coming into their classes. And so I think that, basically on campus here, we have had health screenings for all of our employees every morning at 6 a.m. They get an email and they have to fill that out before they can come to the campus. So now with students, we'll have that same screening when they arrive, but with that, we'll have the validation of a negative test result within 14 days, which gives us some relative assurance that the great majority are good to go.
Obviously, the shutdown triggers were identified in the reopening plan. I'm just curious to hear, does a shutdown mean that classes would go online for the rest of the semester or just until the outbreak is under control? Does it depend on how many cases or the time of year? So say if the outbreak happened in like November when we were all supposed to go home later on in the month, I'm just curious what shutdown means.
Yeah, I would say to you this, Mike, that's a tough question. I would say it really depends on the situation, and it also depends. So, is the situation that we at St. Bonaventure have an outbreak here? That would be treated very differently than an executive order from the governor, as we had in the spring, that we had to let, 75% and then 100% of our workforce work remotely except for essential employees. So I think that there's one piece that could be governed by the state of New York, and there's another piece that would depend on our situation. I think that in consultation with the director of public health of the county, in consultation with the state, we would make a decision if there was an outbreak here per se that we couldn't handle. And that would cause a more immediate suspension, perhaps, of classes that might reopen after things got under control. There could be a situation, quite honestly, where the state says to us at a certain point that the numbers have resurged in our region, as we talked about a little while ago, and that we would go back to phase 2 or phase 1, which may not allow us to have students and faculty on campus. I would venture to guess that if that were to happen, I don't think it would be a situation of waffling back and forth. I think we would be in a situation similar to last spring, where we would leave the campus for an appointed period of time. And then as we proceed through that, and if you recall, in March we left stating that we were going to reopen for classes on campus March 31st. And then when we got to March 31st and things were escalating versus declining, we then made the decision to suspend classes till the end of the semester. So I think it would be very much, a similar kind of situation. It would depend on the situation and how, and then once that situation takes place, what evolves after that.
And it seems like off-campus behavior, I mean, you mentioned you hope students come back next year hoping to party, whatnot, walk around without PPE, but it seems like off-campus behavior is a little bit of an X factor. We've seen all summer long how many outbreaks can start from large parties and bar hopping and stuff like that. In March or April, I don't know which month, but you actually had to send a message to off-campus students about their behavior then. How much does off-campus behavior concern you and the rest of the administration and the decision makers there? And do you guys think that students off campus will take COVID-19 more seriously than they did in the spring?
Well, I think they're going to find, I think the restrictions that are in place now are not as strong as some of the restrictions statewide and nationally. I mean, the whole movement towards, facial masks and so forth was not as much in place when they were leaving here. People were doing that optionally, and then it turned into an executive order. I would say they're going to come back to a situation where compliance is not going to be negotiable. So I think you're going to find across this campus, and I've seen it already, you're going to find individuals, staff, you're going to find other students, you're going to find people who want to protect themselves that are going to be vocal about students not complying. And I think the town of Allegheny, the city of Olean, our surrounding folks that are in law enforcement and so forth are going to be much more cognizant as well for the protection of the communities. So I think that they're going to find that there's going to have to be compliance.
And now moving towards Division I sports here, obviously, St. Bonaventure not in the position that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and all these Power 5 conferences are, but Division I athletics has been a huge discussion this week and in recent weeks. I guess I wanted to get your reaction. Did you agree with the Atlantic 10's decision to, postpone fall sports and implement that 60-day look-in window? And what do you make of what's going on right now with college football?
Sure. Well, you have to remember, Mike, when we made this, when the A10 presidents made the decision to postpone fall sports and have the 60-day window, it was obviously about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and there's a lot that has evolved since that time. I mean, the professional sports were not back in place. Baseball had not started. There were not a lot of models for us as we made the decision. I think the decision we made, I'm fully behind it. I voted on the side of the postponement of fall sports to the spring and the 60-day look-in window, which will be in mid-September. And we did that because we certainly realize the importance of intercollegiate athletics to our students, and we want to make sure we don't see the world through a crystal ball. And a lot of this resurgence that has occurred happened after we made that decision. And so therefore, I think that's all the more reason that the 60-day piece is good for us to take a look, because it could have gone the other way. And then in October, all the Monday morning quarterbacks would say, the presidents made a decision, and look at us, we could be playing. So I think that it's a wise decision, and I think that, we'll see where it goes. But I can tell you, the A10, I'm proud that we are members of the Atlantic 10 Conference. The commissioner has done an excellent job. Our AD is in regular contact with the other ADs and is doing an excellent job. And the President's Council is quite impressive. And I think that a lot of discussion, believe me, I spent a lot of hours in conference calls with the A10 presidents to come to the decision that we came to.
Now, it's a little bit ways out here, but basketball players returned a couple of weeks ago. The season, obviously, like I said, a few months out now, but this is a question many people are probably starting to think about. The revenue and the exposure so large with a basketball season. How much would it hurt the university if games couldn't be played or if fans couldn't attend games at all?
Yeah. I will tell you, it would certainly be a detriment to us if the basketball season were not able to be a go. Again, financially, I'm not sure of the exact dollar amount on this, but we're talking about a substantial amount of money in terms of ticket revenue, in terms of sponsorship, but we're also talking about all of the aspects that surround the basketball program, both men's and women's. It would be a huge disappointment for us. But paramount in all of this is safety. And if that's the way it needs to be, then that's the way it will be. And I think we have taken that approach, and we will continue to take that approach as an institution, and as our conference will as well, in terms of the Atlantic 10.
Now, just a couple of faculty concerns here as we wrap up this interview. Thank you so much again for doing this. How transparent, one faculty member wants to know, how transparent will St. Bonaventure be about positive COVID tests on campus? How timely will the announcements be? And how will contact tracing be done? This person wants to know if that will be conducted by the university or the county.
Well, I think the answer to that question occurred over the weekend. We were informed of a positive case, an asymptomatic case of a student who was in quarantine. We put out a campus-wide notice board to that effect and explained that was the case, and we notified the campus that we did have a quarantined individual who was tested positive and is asymptomatic. I would tell you that the county, of course, will do the contact tracing. The cases that we've had, and when I say cases, not necessarily the university, but there was a case earlier this summer of one of our visiting friars at the time. And we found through that process that individuals were contacted by the county to the contact tracing piece within 24 hours. We also are going to appeal to the faculty and to the staff as well, and students if they're interested. The Director of Public Health, Dr. Watkins, would invite individuals from our campus to be trained to be contact tracers to help with this, in case this way, if people are trained, we'll have a better handle on that as well. Some individuals ask that, can we disclose if a student tests positive to their classmates and the faculty? And of course, with HIPAA law, we can't. And so therefore, we will ensure that through contact tracing, those that have been exposed at a close range to the student or faculty member or staff who might test positive will be contacted. They will be contacted as quickly as possible. I think, again, we have a small county, and our county has really done an excellent job. Every week, I am on a call with the president of the hospital, the county folks, all our various business leaders, and I think that our folks down here have really done a very good job of staying on top of this. The hospital is equipped, has open beds, has ventilators, everything is in place to deal with the situation here in Cattaraugus County.
Next question from a faculty member. We've heard very little about the capital campaign, not the annual Bonaventure campaign during the pandemic. Does the university have a timeline for announcing the public phase and restarting the campaign?
Yeah, well, that last part that you said, restarting, we don't have to worry about that. We've been in the campaign. So one of the things that I have been very cognizant of as president is that we have to continue the business of the university at large. So we've continued our strategic planning process. We've continued our work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've continued our admissions work, our marketing work, our program development work, our work with our academic faculty. I've insisted on our strategic planning work continuing. And with this, our comprehensive campaign continues. And so basically, nothing has changed in terms of timeline there. The comprehensive campaign, we slated that we would have an announcement of the campaign most likely when we reach 60% of the goal. And our estimate for that would be around this time next year, or January, the January of the academic year 21-22. And we are still slated to be on that schedule. For the campaign, we were to be at $40 million was the goal for us to be at on May 31st of this year. We actually were at $45 million. And we continue to have gifts that arrived before I got on this call with you. I spent, Mike, the last 45 minutes writing thank you notes to those who continue to give. I think the whole COVID-19 piece and the pandemic have really, in a lot of ways, I've appealed to our alumni and our donors that, their help, really helps our students with scholarships and financial aid. It helps us move the university forward in terms of advancing our School of Health professions, our academic buildings. There's a lot that we need to do. We're on a great trajectory, and it's a great moment for the university, and we can't leave that. So the comprehensive campaign is very much moving. I mean, I can't be out traveling and having the dinners that I've had and all of the commitments I have, but I still continue that communication via telephone, via Zoom. Athletics has done a great job with some of their fundraising components. Their 6-man club, which brings in revenue and donations for basketball. They've had regular phone calls with the benefactors to keep them up to date, to keep people in the loop. And I think we've done very well on the communication side of this, the advancement side, the athletic side. So I'm very confident that we're still on target to move this thing as we have and make an announcement sometime late next year.
Now, this faculty member, you talked about the Board of Trustees a little bit earlier in this interview here, but this faculty member wants to know what the Board of Trustees' role has been moving forward toward reopening this summer.
Well, as any president, the Board of Trustees, I'm in regular conversation, constant conversation with the board chair, John Sheehan, and with the board officers. And the Board of Trustees are kept abreast on every step of this, but not only kept abreast, but consulted as well for their advice in certain areas. We have a couple of board members who have been extremely helpful. One I would mention is former Congressman, retired Congressman Jim Walsh, who was very instrumental in getting St. Bonaventure University under Sister Margaret's presidency, the funding for the Walsh Science Center. And he has been very helpful to me in providing information from the federal government in various areas where I need to lobby as a president to get funding and so forth. That's just one example. We have other trustees who have given us advice from a medical perspective, from a finance perspective, from a legal perspective. Again, I think I'm in regular contact with our trustees. They have had, the only difference, quite honestly, has been like students and other people during this period of time, they can't come to the campus because they obviously, we have a national board. Many of them live out of state, but we have had virtual meetings. Our meeting schedule continues, our executive committee, our full board. We had a full board meeting the first weekend in June. We will have our full fall board meeting, but we will do it virtually because visitors will be prohibited from campus, and many of them live in states where they would have to quarantine if they came here. But the board has been very active. We have a great board right now, and I'm very pleased with them. I'm very pleased with the way we have operated with our new board chair. Has been really excellent. They've had a huge level of confidence in me as the president and in our senior administration, and they really have been very, very supportive of us as we've gone through this, and very supportive and very nice connection and confidence in our faculty senate and the advice we have from them and in considering their viewpoints as well. So I think shared governance is really at its best at Bonaventure right now.
Now, just one question on the Black Lives Matter movement. Obviously been a difficult summer for the African-American community.
Yeah.
I know that St. Bonaventure held a few town hall meetings to address concerns earlier this summer, but I'm curious to hear what else is being planned to make campus a better place for all, and how does SBU plan to address racism incidents on campus in the future?
Well, I made a promise and a commitment when this whole situation happened when the whole Black Lives Matter movement started, the death of George Floyd, when all that occurred, I made a commitment to the students, to the faculty, to the staff, that this was going to be a very important piece of how we move forward. We had a presidential commission on equity and inclusion that I took a look at and have decided that that needs to be an action-oriented commission. So I've reappointed new commission co-chairs, Dr. Matricia James, our Dean of the School of Business, and Dr. Kimberly Desmond, who's a professor in the Jandoli School. We are about to announce 10 members of that committee, 10 members of the committee from the faculty and the administration, and then we will also add to that 4 students to the commission. We are going to start our work and put together our action plan to move forward. We are talking about the potential in this of, perhaps it is time for us as a university to have a diversity officer, a chief diversity officer for the university that reports to the president. So this will be centered. In the past, a lot of the work in the university related to diversity and inclusion, equity and inclusion, has been under student affairs. We are now going to make this, I'm going to make this a priority, just as I have made the other things that have moved us forward in the last 3 years as priorities: mission integration, our new School of Health Professions, our enrollment, our comprehensive campaign. This will be a priority for this year. And I'm going to start that out by, with our convocation for faculty and staff next Wednesday. I'm going to start with my state of the university conversation with them, followed immediately by this priority. And that is our discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have a national speaker on this who is going to join our session, Dr. Jean Arnold, who happened to be a classmate of mine, quite honestly, at the University of Pennsylvania. And she's served as Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Pennsylvania and at Gettysburg College in Western Michigan. And she also serves nationally as a Vice President of the National Association for University Diversity and so forth. So she will speak to our faculty and staff on next Wednesday, followed by our chairs, co-chairs of the committee, talking about what they're thinking about how this commission will move forward and reporting directly to me. So we're going to take this head on. It is very important. It's very important for us in terms of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion on this campus, not just for our students, but our faculty, our staff, and the community. We need to educate the community as well. And education is the key component here for all of us, including myself, so that we understand the importance of these issues and how all our brothers and sisters feel. Because when you look at this, it's so very closely aligned with who we are as a Franciscan Catholic University. And we're all brothers and sisters, and we need to respect one another in that way.
Just one last thing here, Dr. DePerro, as we wrap it up. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe provide a message to the campus community on the upcoming school year as the August 24th start date approaches.
Sure thing. I would say, Mike, first, thanks for the opportunity to chat with you this evening. I really have enjoyed it, and I appreciate your questions. They're well thought out. And I'm always impressed with you and our other students in the Jandoli School. You've done some great work, and just keep doing it. And as long as I'm here and in this role as president, my door is always open to discuss issues with you and be transparent, whether they're good issues, whether you agree with me and people on campus agree with me, or they don't agree with me. So with that said, I will tell you that during this time, number one, before I talk for a minute about the future in this coming year, I can't tell you how proud I feel right now of our community, of the way that we have navigated this situation since March, all the way around, through the commencement, through the virtual commencement, through the issues related to having to postpone commencement, to a later time, because we've made that promise that we want the class of 20 to come back here and to receive their degrees as they should. I would say to you that this year coming up is going to be unlike anything any of us have experienced. And I think just as we have gone through these last several months, and just as I have been so proud of the way the university, our students, faculty, and staff have handled all this, I want to feel just as proud at the end of the fall or at the end of this period of time that we have to go through to get through this pandemic. I hope that our students will cooperate. I know that our faculty is poised. They've been very supportive. They understand what we're trying to do. They understand that safety is the priority for them and for our students. And I asked our students to come back in that spirit of caring for one another, of being responsible, of being adults, of recognizing that they need to keep one another safe. And if they really care about the faculty, if they really care about these people who are sacrificing to be here, they need to understand that while they might be asymptomatic or COVID-19 may have less of an effect on them, that it can have a greater effect on our faculty, on people like myself who are older. And I hope that they will respect that. I think if they do, and I think that if we all work through each of these things together, and we have trust in the administration, we have trust in our faculty senate, in our board of trustees, in the decision makers, I think if we can trust and have confidence, I think we'll get through this. And I think actually we'll have a successful school year, and we will have an experience that we'll look back at someday and say, hey, you know what? We're Bonnies, and once a Bonnie, always a Bonnie, and as Bonnies, we could get through anything. So I have great confidence. This is a great place with great people who are going to get through this and do it well.
A great message from St. Bonaventure University President Dr. Dennis DePerro as we wrap things up here. Thank you all for watching. Mike Hogan, President DePerro, thank you so much for your time.
Mike, my pleasure. Thank you.